The provincial government's long-awaited climate change plan was unveiled today, and instead of charging companies that pollute, which is a cap-and-trade plan, the government is creating a $400 million fund that pays companies to develop clean technologies.
Our plan emphasizes accountability. It ensures that emission-intensive industries are held responsible for those emissions, while at the same time acknowledging that Ontario-based companies have to compete in global markets.
The government says it can meet the emissions reduction targets agreed to in the Paris Accord, which calls for a 30% reduction from 2005 levels. Ontario has already reduced emissions by 22%, largely because of the closing of coal-fired plants. Premier Ford has maintained the Liberal cap-and-trade plan, which he calls a carbon tax, would hurt taxpayers. Just yesterday, he blamed cap-and-trade for the closing of the GM plant in Oshawa. Now, in the ongoing spat with Doug Ford, the federal government is promising to impose a carbon plan by January 1st. That's going to cost Ontario taxpayers an extra $244 a year. However, they will get an average $300 rebate. Very confusing. Environment Minister Rod Phillips says he hopes to speak to his federal counterpart about this new plan.
I'm hopeful that when they see that we are going to hit the targets that they agreed to, the 2030 Paris targets, they'll appreciate that the way that that's done, this dogma about having to have a carbon tax, won't be as important. We also would like to say, hey, we have a way, and we're happy to work with them about how it works, but we can get 4 public dollars for every one of your public dollars. We could exceed the Paris targets if they would take the money that they've taken away from Ontarians and given it back, and be even more successful on that front.
It's really disappointing to see Premier Ford's climate plan. We had hoped that we would be able to work with the Ford government, but unfortunately, Premier Ford, like Andrew Scheer, doesn't seem to understand that climate change is real. It's having a serious impact. The Ford government wants to go back in time, and they want to make it free to pollute.
Okay, that was the federal response. And hear what the Ontario opposition members have to say about this.
The parts that they say are going to reduce emissions haven't worked in Australia, so I don't know why they would work in Ontario, especially when the Australia plan is a $2.5 billion plan and this is a $400 million plan.
There is a scheme, there is an attempt at a plan, which again, some polluters will make a lot of money out of, but which won't protect us from dangerous climate change.
Now, I also talked to an analyst from the David Suzuki Foundation. He wouldn't say whose plan is better, the previous Liberal governments who endorsed cap and trade or this new plan by the PC party. Here's what he would say, however.
I hesitate to even call it a plan. I mean, it's just a very thin document. And if you're really serious about protecting the environment and addressing climate change, you do a bunch of other things like places like California has done or the European Union, none of which are in this document. You put a price on carbon pollution, just an obvious thing if you want people to pollute less. You build out renewable energy, wind and solar, like strong economies around the world. You have an independent environmental commissioner who can make sure you're making progress. You build out public transit in a big way because the biggest source of greenhouse gases is transportation. So we need a really robust transit plan. That's not there.
Now, the government insists it's going to meet the Paris Accord targets. Do you believe that?
I'm skeptical about it. I mean, I don't see anything in there that would really make that the case. There's a lot of voluntary stuff in there. They're going to review over after a few years. We'll see. I don't think they're doing the sort of things that would really get the strong and deep reductions that we need. We need carbon pricing, we need renewable energy, and we need public transit, and they're not in this plan.
The plan also promises to come up with ways to reduce garbage heading for landfill, and it will bring in tougher rules for recycling and promises an annual litter cleanup day.